If I said at the start of the season that this Arsenal fan sat next to me would be saying, "Let's just get through this game without losing," you'd be stunned. But that is exactly what Harry's just said. Why do you want to just get through this game?
Because we've been battered and bruised by our Champions League exit. It's been a really tough campaign for Arsenal in a lot of ways. Injuries, bad luck, maybe some bad decisions along the way internally as well, certainly in the January transfer window, in my opinion. And we've just got to a point where we need the season to end. If you speak to anyone who sort of follows Arsenal very, very closely, the conversations now are all forward thinking. It's all about what we're going to do in the summer. How do we fix those issues? How do we take that next step? And I think a lot of people are keen to put what's going on in the Premier League and what's gone on all season, quite frankly, in the rearview mirror. So we're in a place now where we want to finish second. I think it's important that Arsenal show everybody that even in a bad season, their bottom line nowadays is second. I think it's really important that they show that. I think it's important when you go out into the transfer market and you're trying to convince players to come. I think it's important in terms of keeping that buy-in when it comes to the Mikel Arteta and Arsenal project. So I think for me, Newcastle are right on our heels. They're coming up behind us. They're looking dangerous. We've got a really poor record against them in recent times. They've been one of our bogey teams. So, yeah, it's important for me that Arsenal get through this game and then go into the final day at least, knowing that as long as they match Newcastle's result, they can't finish above them.
Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. Like, genuinely, with Arsenal being in the situation you're in, one win in the last 6 Premier League games, Harry, clawing onto this, that and the other, I'm enjoying it. I got to be honest, H. But for Newcastle, they've got to smell blood, because if H feels like that, and you're one of the more reasonable Arsenal fans, the ones in the stadium are going to be feeling really nervous, and a Newcastle early goal puts them in a situation.
Yeah, Newcastle are one of the most informed teams in the country. I saw it firsthand against my team Chelsea, where Newcastle weren't amazing, but Eddie Howe's tactical tweaks, changed to a 3 at the back. It just shows that he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys when it comes to football managers in the Premier League. And I think a little bit underrated, maybe because he's English, maybe because people aren't enamoured by the style of football, maybe because Jason Tindall gets some of the limelight. But Eddie Howe to this season, if Newcastle finish second and win a trophy, that's one of the best seasons the English managers ever had in recent years anyway. And so I'm just intrigued by the matchup and intrigued to see how Arsenal approach this game. Because like Harry said, the goal is to avoid defeat. Avoid defeat and you're as good as second. Like, we know Southampton got a draw against Man City, but we expect Arsenal to beat Southampton in the final game of the season. Whereas Newcastle got to play Everton, not necessarily the easiest fixture. Expect Newcastle to beat them, but Newcastle are going to go gun-ho, I think, for the first 20, 30 minutes of this game, trying to get a win or trying to get a goal, because they know if they put Arsenal under pressure, the crowd maybe start to turn, then you can really start to turn the screw. And that's what Newcastle have done really well in the big games this season. 3 times already against Arsenal this year, they've beaten them. Twice in the League Cup semi-final, once in the league. They'll be the first side ever to win 4 times against Arsenal in the season. They can smell blood, and I think it's going to be mate for a very interesting game at the Emirates.
Yeah, that sounds like a Newcastle fan.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? He does. He does. No, I think for Arsenal, what happened at Anfield last week is quite significant, because I think in the first half you could see an Arsenal team that were clearly checked out, and I think the reaction that they must have got from their manager at halftime, it must have been full-blown hair dryer treatment, right? Because they came out in the second half, completely different animal, completely different team. Probably could have won it. I know Liverpool could have won it at the end. I thought both sides had the chances to win it. Obviously, Arsenal went down to 10 men again. That's the 6th time in the Premier League this season. I would argue that at least 4 of them were ridiculous. So when I talk about bad luck, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. But I think the fact that Mikel Arteta really seemed to get into them at halftime and then was very angry after the game about the lack of application in that first half, maybe that's just triggered something within the camp that's, really lit that fire again and said to them, no, we can't let this fizzle out. We can't allow our season to fade away. I'm checked out because I'm emotionally drained and I don't think I can go through another emotional roller coaster. So maybe when I say, let's go through the game and make sure that we just get through it, it's me just not wanting to go through that exhaustion. But I'd hope that the players and the team are more up for it. It's the last home game of the season. Yeah. The fans are going to turn up in their numbers. You're going to do your lap of appreciation at the end like they always do. You don't want to be doing that off the back of a defeat.
We'll come to Newcastle in a second, because I know H has got a lot of strong opinions on Eddie Howe. But back on this Arsenal point of view, if Arsenal don't finish second and end up finishing third, considering the season they've had, with everything, to be fair, that H has factored in, I think is true. Like, you have had injury problems. Some of the red cards have been unfortunate, but I do also think Arsenal have made bad choices as well, and Arteta's made bad choices at times, and you've got players out of form at different times. But if Arsenal finish third, how much of a disaster is that?
I don't know if it's a disaster, because I'd be a hypocrite to sit here and say that when Arsenal was still in the Champions League, I sat on this show and other shows and said that Arsenal should forgo the league, just concentrate and put all the eggs in the Champions League basket. And then this is what happens in the league as a result. And so for me to sit here after Arsenal didn't progress to the Champions League semi-final and say it'll be a disaster if they didn't finish in the top two, I wouldn't have cared if Arsenal finished in the top 2 or 3 if they won the Champions League. And that's what they were trying to do. And the poor form in the league coincides with them trying to really push and go in the Champions League with a squad that's been more condensed as a result of injuries and suspensions. And so it wouldn't be a disaster, but one thing Arteta's had for him in his time as Arsenal manager is constant progression year on year. It was 8th, it was 8th, it was 5th, it was 2nd, it was 2nd. And if it was just if you're looking at that graph, if it's to take a little dip in this season, there would be a few conversations had amongst Arsenal fans and amongst general football fans. I think you just want to maintain that level of steady progression. Maybe you haven't taken the steps forward in the league this year, but definitely took a step forward in Europe, which is a huge benefit to a club like Arsenal. And so, not a disaster, but Arsenal definitely want to be finishing in the top 2 just for what it will do for them in terms of confidence next season.
I've heard a lot about pressure on Arteta. Read loads about Arteta has to win the league next year, and I think because Arsenal didn't get, I think if you got to a Champions League final and lost, you'd have a bit of leeway, but obviously you didn't get there, and so therefore now next season is basically do or die, and it sounds like what people are saying, and Arsenal fans as well. If Arsenal don't win the league next year, or Arsenal don't win the Champions League next year, Arteta's done.
I don't like creating ultimatums like that in football, because I think the reason football is the best sport on the planet is because there's so many variables to it. And I think that to put ultimatums in place like that is to ignore the fact that there are so many variables. So, for example, at the start of this season, everybody would have told you it's Arsenal's year. Now, I would have told you that at the start of the season, and I would have been looking at Arteta and going, you've made good progress. You finished 2nd when nobody expected you to. Then you finished 2nd again and you got closer. You took it to the final day. Surely now you're going to do it. You're going to get there. And it hasn't happened. But when I think about the reasons why it hasn't happened, yes, I attribute some of them to Mikel Arteta, and I attribute some of them to the football club and the decisions they've made. But I also attribute some of that sort of falling off to other factors as well. And so I think it depends on why you think they dropped off. If you think they dropped off because Mikel Arteta tried to change the style of play and bought some big players in the summer that didn't work out, or, made horrible tactical decisions, fine, look at him and say, you're on your last chance now. Go and win it next season or you're done. But I don't see this season like that. I think when a manager comes to the end of his tenure, you get a feeling. I felt it with Unai Emery. There was that game against Frankfurt. I wasn't liking what he was doing up until that point. And after that game against Eintracht Frankfurt, I walked out of the stadium that night and I said to all my friends and everybody that was at the game with me, he's done. I had that feeling inside that he was done, and the next morning he was gone. So you kind of know. And I'm not there yet with Mikel Arteta. I'm not, because I think he's picked the club up off the ground. I think he's had to deal with some really difficult situations, especially when he first came in. And you got to think that he was taking on his first job and he had problems like Mesut Ozil and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang flying off and not coming to training and just doing what he wanted. He's had to shift players that nobody wanted to buy. He's had to take hits and losses, which has impacted his transfer budgets and meant that he's had to make do with players maybe at times that weren't the right ones. I think he's done so much good for the club. He's still got leeway for me. It's not necessarily do or die right now, but if he starts the season and I think he's the one costing us and making mistakes, then maybe my opinion will change.
I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we look at Arsenal, because he is a good manager, and let's not forget this is his first job in football. I don't ever think we'll get to a point where we look at Mikel Arteta and say he's costing the Arsenal games, but we might get to a point and say that he just can't get Arsenal over the line, and that's where I think we're at the moment with Mikel Arteta. I remember I was watching, again, another football documentary. It was one about...
Got a lot of time on your hands.
I've got a little baby, so not that much time. But yeah, and I watched Jurgen Klopp's first press conference at Liverpool, and he goes, I'm pretty sure within 4 years we'll win a title. And he was referring to the Premier League. Obviously, it was the Champions League that he delivered first and the Premier League the year following. But what he was doing in the process was getting to cup finals as well. In his first year, he got to a League Cup final, got to a Europa League final. In 2018, he got to a Champions League final. They lost all of those finals, and again, Liverpool were getting stick for that in terms of not getting over the line. But at least you're taking the fans on a journey. And with Arsenal's history in the FA Cup, what I would like to see as a neutral from the outside looking in is Arteta, which he did in the Champions League, and you felt that in the club. He took you on a journey. Take you on a journey in some of these other competitions as well. Take you on a journey in the FA Cup. If Arsenal had the solace of playing in the FA Cup final this weekend, despite finishing second or third, I think fans would be appeased, and that's what Jurgen Klopp did.
But can I just say something on that though? Because this is the thing. I agree. The FA Cup is a big part of Arsenal's history, and nothing hurts me more than watching us fail in a cup that I've grown up loving and adoring. Do you know what his last 3 FA Cup draws were? Manchester United this season. Shouldn't have lost at home to Manchester United. There's no excuse for that. But prior to that, the year before it was Liverpool, and the year before that it was Manchester City. Yeah. So this, when I talk about sort of there being other factors that you have to consider, there isn't a disgrace in getting knocked out of a cup by Liverpool or by Manchester City. But people will paint those campaigns as a disaster. And it's
But
not.
if you were going to win these trophies, at some point you would have to play the best teams. Like this season, obviously, we can ignore Liverpool.
Yeah, but
City, but this season,
Kweki just said if they got to the final,
Take you on a journey.
then people would be more forgiving of it.
But I do remember the game against Man City. Man City went strong. Arsenal rotated. You were both in the title race, and that's the issue that I've had with Arteta. I remember that game against Man City.
No, that's not right. We did go strong.
Did you?
We did. We
Did
did.
you go strong?
I'm sure
We
you
did
rotated.
go strong.
There's the
I'm
game
sure
Bernardo
you
We did
rotated.
go strong. We did go
they can
strong.
let us know the guys
Yeah,
in the comments who actually
We
love the
did go
show.
strong.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, we can check that because I'm sure Arsenal rotated.
I feel like
and
you rotated
Man
and Bernardo Silva scored the opening goal. Is that
And
the game?
Man City went strong. Maybe I'm wrong. They'll let us know in the comments. But I just want to see Arteta take this Arsenal team on a bit more of a journey in the cup competitions. That his first competition that he won at Arsenal was an FA Cup. It wasn't the journey that you would have liked because it was behind closed doors. But I think the fans would be appeased if over these last few years where you challenge, you've got a League Cup and an FA Cup to show for it, and maybe a league title next year. I just think that he's maybe overlooked these cup competitions, which do mean a lot to football fans. The team playing against Newcastle, that League Cup meant absolutely everything, and that's made the season even glossier than it maybe would have been.
But
before.
it meant everything to Newcastle because of the context of Newcastle's history. They're a club that hadn't won a trophy in 70 odd years. So to them, it was a big deal. I guarantee you that the people that sit there of an Arsenal persuasion and slag off Mikel Arteta and say, he's got to deliver. If he won the Carabao Cup, they would not have it.
Yeah.
They would be the first people to be up in arms and say, that's not what this club is about. That's not our standard. Our standards are the Premier League and the Champions League. So I get what you're saying, right? The trophy gives you currency. It's a currency that you can use when you're trying to shop for credits, right? But it isn't going to appease the Arsenal fans. I promise you.
I think.
No, not at all.
What? Not even the FA Cup.
Maybe an FA Cup goes further than an EFL Cup, Carabao Cup. But if Arsenal had won the Carabao Cup this year, fell off the way we did in the Premier League, and then went out in the Champions League, I promise you no one will call the season.
I agree with you, but I would say on the variable of the FA Cup, you played Manchester United this year.
Yeah.
You should have won that game.
100%.
And I think in any cup competition, in reality, every 1 in 3 years, you're going to get a draw you should win. Normally, every 2 in 3, you're going to get a difficult draw, which I think is what's happened with you. The fact you haven't beaten United means that you basically gave up the FA Cup to focus on the Champions League, which you then didn't win, and gave up the Premier League to win the Champions League, and you didn't win that either. I'm sure we'll have many of these conversations at other points. Very, very quickly, if Eddie Howe finishes second, and obviously he's won the Carabao Cup already, we'll ask H this in a second, because I know what he's going to say, but would you say he's up for Manager of the Year? Or the season, I should say.
It's so tough because we pretend as if this is binary, because the manager of the season really is for your league performance, but you always bring in the cup performances into it. You always do. It's just impossible not to. So he'd be a contender. Obviously, Slot would be a contender. I know that Forest have fallen off, and the incident with Marinakis hasn't kind of put a great gloss on the Forest thing, but Nuno definitely be a contender. So I think there's 2 or 3 contenders, and Eddie Howe's definitely one of them for sure.
I'd put him in the conversation.
Through gritted teeth.
Through gritted teeth. If you think about it, if you were a Newcastle fan at the start of the season, you couldn't have asked for a better campaign than what they've even delivered now. If they get in the Champions League, whether that's as 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, whatever, to qualify for the Champions League again and to win a cup, which they've been without for such a long time, instantly that's a great season for Newcastle. I think for me, the problem I have with Eddie Howe is I look at what he's doing, and I give him immense credit, by the way, for qualifying for the Champions League the first time, then falling away, and then going again without necessarily having the investment that he needed. But there was investment when he first took the job. There will be investment again this summer. And Eddie Howe has spent money in his career previously. He spent a lot of money at Bournemouth. That goes under the radar a lot, and I have no idea why. I think he's a good manager, and I think he's improved since those days, and he's developed. But do I look at Eddie Howe and think, you're going to lead this kind of new Saudi Newcastle project and take them to that really next level where they're competing for the really elite trophies, not the second-rate ones, with all due respect?
But why do you think Arteta can and Eddie Howe can't? What's Arteta showing you that Eddie Howe hasn't? Is it just a feeling?
I think it's feeling. I think it's personality. I think personality is a big thing. I don't think Eddie Howe's got the personality.
Okay.
I think that a manager needs to get people to be able to follow him. And I think what works for Eddie Howe is that he's got a high level of player in terms of quality, but he hasn't got the egos that you would experience at a really massive club. And I don't think that he would be able to handle that because he doesn't have a personality that grips you. And people will laugh at that and say it's stupid, but being a manager is not just about managing your players. You got to manage the fans' expectations. You got to manage the media. You got to manage the tough interviews. You got to manage.
I would argue he does that. Like, yes, Arteta is probably more charismatic, but that the fans of Newcastle adore Eddie Howe. They were literally on their knees for him, obviously, when he won the trophy. And then on top of that, I think the media really likes him. No one ever says a bad word about him. The only difference, obviously, and we can't ever put this into context unless he ever goes to another club, but like he's under less pressure at Newcastle, so he doesn't have to do interviews 24/7.
The season he had last season, he wouldn't get away with that at a big club.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to Newcastle, they are a big club. I shouldn't say it like that. They are a big club, but they're not among the biggest.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. You can have off seasons at a club like Newcastle. Look at Aston Villa, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but Aston Villa not following up Champions League qualification, that's a failure for me.
Really?
That's a failure.
No.
It is. It's an absolute failure.
I would love to talk about it. I would love to talk about it.
Getting smashed in the FA Cup semi-final by Crystal Palace as well. That's a failure. But because there's not that level of expectation, Emery's going to get away with it. And that's why he's rated as one of the best managers in the world, because he's coasted by winning second-rate competitions and having on and off seasons. And it's fine because he's not at that elite level where the expectation's up here.
Let's get a score predictions for Arsenal against Newcastle. We're going to have this Emery-Aston Villa conversation off camera. Quick, I'll let you start.
Just for the narrative, I'd love Newcastle to win. I just don't know if they will. I think Arsenal will just hold them off. Going for a 2-2 draw in this one.
I'm going to go for a 2-1 Arsenal win. I don't think it'll be a great game, to be honest with you. I think Arsenal will be kind of going through the motions. I think Newcastle... I don't know. I think 2-1 to the Arsenal is what I'm going to go for. I can't see it being a great game.
I'm going to go 1-1.